Dr. Shastri, you just talked about the importance of clean data using equipment. What happens if you take the approach that Dr. Rao is talking about, in which you have all of these dirty data from people and the way that dirty data are collected, in which there is a person that interprets another person's opinion or what they see and perceive through their senses? What do you think of this approach of collecting data on humans and using that as truth? Is it impossible to gain truth from humans to humans through humans, or what do you think as a chemist and as a metallurgist?
Very, very difficult question. For example, I once did a survey for a company, and before the job was given, I was told that please select a sample which will show me this and now these results. So they were very clear, they wanted the following results, therefore collect a sample which will give those results, analyze their data. I personally believe very much that as long as we do not automate the data that is coming in, it is going to be extremely difficult to prove that this works and that works. And therefore, I keep on telling, today is the data. Today, we are able to get data from every single equipment. Today, the mobile, for example, I can give you heart rate, but we have to be very, very clear. I want to give you one example. Another 2 minutes, Dr. Bhaswati. Okay. Recently, my brother has been diabetic for a very long period of time. Diabetes runs in my family. We are genetic. About a year ago, he has a pump. He has an insulin pump. A year ago, a company came and said that, hey, we will give you a machine which, moment you take your sugar levels, it will record the sugar levels in our computer. We will have a complete data of your sugar levels, how you are controlling it. And when the number of, what do you call them, those sticks get over, we will send you a new set of. They also said, as a test, we will give one more which your wife can use.
Test strips or the machine?
The machine with the test strips.
Okay.
1 month went by, and then they sent the data. They sent tests for my sister-in-law. And they sent the results which show that my sister-in-law had diabetes and not my brother. Because in that equipment, there was no way to identify which one is whose. Very simple. For example, if you take Lifebuoy soap, one is green, one is red. You could have done as much. Or in today's day, you can always say, hello Prasad, hello Anita. You understand what I mean? No. By mistake, somewhere it got interchanged. The entire data got interchanged. This is serious.
You're saying wherever humans are involved, data can be messed up. So,
and if you
study human disease, then
clean the data, you are lost.
Okay, but then how do you do it? Dr. Ghattaora, you want to say something?
I just want to say something. Just also picking up from Dr. Rao, and maybe by trying to answer Dr. Shastri's. When I think about Ayurveda and traditional Indic sciences, their research methodology of Ayurveda is basically based on tools of examination. We know them as pariksha. And there's a wonderful way that it's inspired from this philosophical term called pramana, which actually refers to evidence. And when I look at what these tools of examination include, which is what we just spoke about, the direct observation, pratyaksha, the inference, the anumana, the authoritative testimonies or literature, aptopadesha. Now, when I look at these three basic tools, the modern day research also depends on these tools, whose efficacy now has been augmented by these scientific and sort of technologically advanced devices. And we've sort of almost steered away from our basic principles of, you know, when it comes to the human interaction with a patient and applying these three principles, what's happening, as far as I was concerned as a clinician, is I was handicapped because my training didn't allow me to develop that level of insight, that I was never allowed to develop my precognition abilities. And when I came to Ayurveda, when I came to Siddha, and they were talking about this, and I had my scientific head, I thought, you know, how does this work? How do I use these precognitive abilities? Where is the data? Who's going to train me? Where is the protocol which says, oh, you are experiencing this about your patient or your client? And what ended up happening is I developed a very mechanistic point of view in the way I was handling patients. So when it comes to, you know, when we're looking at a reference point of, you know, going back to your question, Dr. Bhaswati, about, you know, how do we develop these things? Yes, it has to start with that interaction between the person who has the knowledge, which means, again, we have to review the people who are treating. They have to be taken away from this very didactic level of education to a very much kind of broader. Our medical schools or wherever it is, we have to have a different format of training so that when they are sitting in front of a patient, their ability to evaluate them and ability to decide and decipher what is appropriate is not always hindered by layers of mechanistic protocols, but more actually to do with that engagement. And I think this is necessary. It's the one thing I've learned through my journey from going through population data coming down to the individual.
Right. Thank you for adding that. We are four technically, you know, some of the most educationally elite people here. Let's take this over to the policy level and to the population level, where people take scientific evidence and they parrot back at me, well, you do Ayurveda, you should look at scientific evidence. Or you don't know what the scientific evidence says around COVID, around Alzheimer's, around diabetes, around any disease, cancer that we've talked about. So where do we take these challenges that we've talked about in scientific evidence, the way it's produced, the way it's harnessed, the way it's interpreted, the way it's replicated or non-replicated, the way the hypotheses actually might not even fit in the correct framework of what truth is, because we might not be drawing the framework in a way that we might be able to when more evidence is discovered. How do we take those limitations and address this huge problem that's going on right now to lawmakers, policymakers, and the population, and all these people who think they're scientists because they read, you know, a journal every once in a while, or even the doctors who are limited because they become mechanistic. How do we take this and help society understand that these limitations in scientific evidence require them to not be blind to trusting the experts, which is a comment that we made earlier in the hour. How do we get them so they don't just blindly trust the data and trust the experts? So we only have about 10 minutes left. Let's see if we can let's see if we can debate this question for the next few minutes. Dr. Rao, would you like to start?
Yeah, so, you know, being a scientist myself, let's remember one thing. We are very careful. Scientists are extremely careful in accumulating a lot of evidence and to test their theories very thoroughly. Okay, now there might be some examples of misleading evidence. There are always bad apples in the profession, not a problem. But the question is that examples, whatever be it shouldn't persuade us scientists, okay, by saying that science cannot be trusted. Because science or scientific evidence is a process of constant refinement. It's a knack for ironing out any unhelpful twists and turns in the long run. And we all know that even the most trustworthy can occasionally let us down. But that doesn't mean that scientific evidence is all incorrect. So what happens is, again, let's go back to the basics. Are there systematic data? Is the data supported by evidence? Is the evidence drawn from just one source, or is it been replicable by independent sources? And is there a proper premise on which the data has been worked about? Okay, and then I understand there's a lot of pressure from funding agencies. There's a lot of pressure from big farmers. There's a lot of pressure from the political organizations. But if you want the scientific evidence to succeed at the end of the day into something that is good for the human, all right, then let science take its own course, in the sense of all these have to be verified, all these have to be tested properly, and then at the end we have to make sure that we just don't rely on animal models. We have to bring it to patients, human patients first, and then make sure that it works. And then when we're talking about human patients as well, we have to make sure that we are looking at the human as an entire person. Okay, because the reason being that, let me quickly summarize here one small little thing which will put us in perspective about what exactly happens when you work against this entire thing about humans being humans, or an unfractionated approach. Remember this famous guy, I think his name was Dr. Emoto. He worked on water. Okay, his hypothesis was human speech and thoughts, they have dramatic effects on water. And what? He collected the data, he systematized it. Okay, he verified it within his own setup. And his logic was very clear. The human body is 75% water. So which means the minute we talk about thoughts, the minute we talk about emotions, the minute we talk about positive or negative emotions, what are we talking about? We are talking about these emotions, neurochemicals, all right? The hormones. Where is it all? It's all baked in the fatty tissue and in the water, in the aqueous environment in the brain. So his logic was that these human speech and thoughts have dramatic effects on water. So what he did, he collected the water in specific glass crystals, in specific glasses. He put various kinds of words, or he asked people to actually speak. And then he froze that water. And then he observed those crystals under the microscope. And then he said that any positive thoughts or emotions created beautiful crystallized structures of water, which did not happen the same way when you have negative thoughts or when you have negative emotions. Now, he published his findings. Everybody else slandered him. Okay, they rebuked him, and then they said this is a false thing. But remember one thing, not a single person went back and said, can we replicate the data? So exactly. the question is, where did we go wrong here? I mean, he wrote the book, published the papers, but yet, even though he was slandered, not a single person went back and checked to see, can it be verified? Okay, and the logic is there. After all, what happens when somebody, barks at you, or somebody or when you're angry, or when you're fearful? There has to be some changes happening, right? And he tried to show those changes. So what I'm trying to say is that make sure that all your scientific evidence, once you translate it to humans, make sure that you take into account the emotions, the thoughts, everything behind that. And then, of course, we'll be able to succeed. And then, we can then rest all these people, whether it's political people or whether it's pharmaceuticals, we can show them this evidence in the form of all these data.
Okay.
Sorry.
We are going to end promptly at 5:30 India time, which is in 2 minutes, and have an after show, talk to you more about Emoto, because there are people that have actually done studies to try to replicate his work that I know of. So, but they weren't able to publish in big journals. To end though, in the next 2 minutes, I'm hoping that the other two panelists can address the question of how do we get scientific evidence to influence society's decision-making, since We can't wait for the many number of years for science to finally discover what has happened. Certainly with COVID, we can't wait for the science to figure out what COVID is. People need to make policies and need to make decisions. Dr. Sastri, please.
I'll just take 1 minute.
Yes.
First and foremost, data collection has to be automated because every single method of automating data is available. You need help? Ask me, I will do it. Even taking photographs, trying to see whether a person is smiling, I can literally do everything. We do this in restaurants, number one. Number two, once a drug is released, data collection should not stop. For example, I am on, let us say, mixed human actropid. The data from me has to be available for the next 50 years. It is just that the drug has been released, therefore the company says, okay, now we are making money, let's stop. No, no, no. Data has to be collected all the time as long as the drugs are in the market. Yes, that's all.
Thank you. Dr. Arati, please.
Yeah, I think from my point of view, the conflict at the heart of science as a method of inquiry based on reason, evidence, hypothesis, and collective investigation versus belief system is that we need to change the worldview in how information is translated. So when we are looking at data which gets published and the publication is peer-reviewed and read by academicians, educators, policymakers, researchers, it's interesting what filters out from that publication and becomes headline news where the other millions of people receive that information. That translation is a real problem for me. And I'll give you one small anecdotal example. There was a headline in one of our British newspapers some years back, which said, a study says a glass of red wine every day prevents breast cancer. And if you look at the published study, what the published study was showing, there is an enzyme which is on the peel of the red grape, which when it was activated inside a Petri dish on a cancer cell, it showed a positive effect. How does that suddenly become a glass of red wine which could prevent breast cancer? That is in headline newspapers. How dare they? How dare they put that in there and give wrong information? Where was the public health policy makers sitting at that point? Why was that never refuted?
So Arti, I'm going to have you continue in a moment. I need to conclude at the end of 60 minutes. This is the formal end of the Ayush Hard Talk. Thank you for being with us as we discovered what is scientific evidence, in which we had 3 separate clinicians, scientists who span over, I think between the 4 of us, we span over 12 different disciplines. And we all know that there are major problems in scientific evidence, either in its actual approximation of truth, or in the way that it's collected, or in the way it's not collected, or in the way it's interpreted. And so for those of you who are in the public who are not scientists generating data or analyzing data, please think about the fact that you shouldn't read the headline news and you shouldn't take every single article that the modern medical system or the biomedical system comes up with as being irrefutable truth. Thank you for attending, and thank you for your inputs on the chat group. With the end of this formal program, we now begin the after show. So we'll give them a chance to just cut the tape. So we'll just give them a moment. And now for the after show, Arti, I would love for you to continue what you're saying and to have the other 2 panelists also give any other comments with the framework that we have an ongoing pandemic right now in which in certain parts of the world there are things happening, such as the vaccine today that was mentioned by Dr. Sastri, that they want to test in the country of India without ever checking for any kind of evidence. If scientific evidence is so important, and the headline news that you're talking about where medicinal chemistry is extrapolated, or network pharmacology or bioinformatics is extrapolated. What do you guys think we should do? Arti, if you want to finish what you were
just add a small comment to that. This is where I feel that when we want to find a way of bypassing normal research protocols and expedite things very quickly, it's interesting when we're surrounded by a very fear-based population. And let's not forget the economic impact which this is having right now. There are other powers at play. So when there is a decision to be made about using Pfizer's vaccine in India, we know for sure that it's a huge human trial which we can have access to. So the premise is, yes, let's treat the Indian population with this vaccine. It'll give us a great database, but let's forget about the people who may die, the attrition rate. Where is the ethics in how this knowledge is going to be produced? Who is going to be answerable to that? Is that Pfizer who should be answerable to that?
Can we have a little discussion on ethics? I didn't have time to talk about this in the last hour, but it's a huge issue because, as Dr. Banik has just said in the chat, we have, and I don't know if you guys have the chat open, but there's some very great inputs by various scientists that is going on the side here. The issue of ethics, Dr. Banik has said that nobody can tell us that science is our private property. All data should be shared, and it should be collected, yes, but it should be open to everyone. What do you guys think of that? What is the abuse potential, Dr. Sastri, if you collect a bunch of data from equipment and then it gets into the wrong hands? Can you talk about not so much a science fiction movie that we've seen, but what you think is actually going to happen?
Then what happens is, if the data is on a public domain where somebody else can also look at the same data, then exactly like I told you in the Cornell bird site, people will say this person's data should never be relied on. Please filter the data of this person completely. Otherwise, if you put that person, no journal will accept your publication.
Who decides who are the truth sayers? Cornell University.
You conclusion, somebody else can analyze that. And you say, I took this data, the same data can be taken by somebody else and analyze it and see if the data matches. Okay. The results match.
Good. Dr. Rao, you want to say something to Dr. Sastri?
Yeah, so I'll address both. So with regard to Dr. Arti's thing about the red wine thing, it's just not about cancer, but it was shown that the compound in red wine, which is resveratrol, actually extends longevity. And then they did all this work on worms, on flies, and then they extended to rats, and then to mice, guinea pigs, rabbits, everything. And then what? Pfizer then took that technology, and then they said, we're going to come up with a drug that will extend aging. And guess what? Now they've closed the entire department that was working on that because it doesn't work that way. And we know why. All right. Because remember one thing, whether it's resveratrol or whether it's COVID-19 virus, okay, we have to focus not on the component, but on the person. And this is extremely important. If we talk about COVID-19 virus, we don't have to focus on the virus. We have to talk about the person. So as Dr. Sastri mentioned, yes, put out the data, put it out there for public domain, but don't take that on face value. Use the data in India, work it out for the Indians. In England, work it out for the Britishers. In US, work it out for the US, for the people in the USA. Because at the end of the day, remember one thing, we may be humans, but because of the climate, because of the environment, because of the season, because of the geographical location, our metabolic gut is different in different countries. And so we may not respond to those things the same way as what others are responding. And so what may be efficacious in USA may not be the same efficacy in other countries. And so the data has to be out there, but it has to be independently verified in each country. And that's how we can prevent any kind of problems happening in that country for that given data.
But when a that,
science as well. Sorry.
go ahead.
That shows good science, and that's taking up principles of the index systems where things have to be evaluated as per geography, season, individuality, and we're going again and again back to, yes, population-based data has its usefulness in determining, you know, that 80% on the Bayesian curve inside, but what about the two ends which nobody talks about? Who, you know, and isn't that lives, people's lives at the end of the day? And who's accountable for that? You know, so it's easy to demonstrate these things statistically, but we should go back to those basic principles that come from our index systems.
Here's another bias. If a scientist were to say, hey, we need to look at individuals, it's now called personalized medicine, the P4 system, we talk about epigenetics, and we take it as something scientific. But 5,000 years ago, there's something called the Dasha Vida Pariksha, Desha, Dosha, Bala, Kala, rights, Atmiya, all these factors which were just delineated by Dr. Rao. We already know that these are important, and Dr. Shastri nods about this, you nod about this. It's already in the Ayurvedic system. What prevents us from taking these frameworks that are in homeopathy and Siddha and Ayurveda and Suaripa and saying that, you know, we already have these frameworks. Just because they're not in modern medicine doesn't mean that they shouldn't already be validated, because we have thousands of years of already doing realizing that we need to go global. Global is global, local. And now, I don't know if any of you have been reading the latest kind of proposals of the environment, but what they're saying is that, you know, generally people in the olden days realized that instead of having large cities, what they needed to have is environments, what we in India call nagars. There are things that you could, there are geographical boundaries where you can to the other in 20 minutes. And within that 20-minute kind of, it's usually marked by either a natural landmark like a river or a mountain, or is a boundary set up. In that area were markets, were their own power station, their own well, whatever they needed so that people could live an entire life. And those were the geographical boundaries by which people were defined, so that the rajas and the various structures that were in ancient times would use those structures to try to delineate what is needed for this population. NHS has now done this with their, you know, their next version. I think Dr. Arti can talk about that. But we are not talking about the fact that this science has already been made millennia ago, centuries ago, actually. And now when we come to COVID, there are many, many scientists in that same system of Ayurveda that does the individual-based medicine that are saying that, look, what we need to do is look at the gut. In fact, the reason that I was late coming to the pre-conference is I'm talking with a group of clinicians who have been gathering data on how to use Ayurveda. You guys all know it's illegal. You saw the published article I had last week. In it, we're talking about the medicines that are actually used. So I talked with one of the doctors and he said, we know we need to look at the patient's gut. And he's been gathering data that show that if the person's gut is healthy, if they are given langhana at the first signs of mild to moderate symptoms, if they are guided to either do a mridhu virechana or they're given something to clean out the source of their gut problem, like if it's, you know, if it's a GERD or acid reflux, they're given medicine to clean that out, they do not progress toward ARDS, which is the leading cause of, you know, imminent death right now. He also told me that in parts of India, urban India, the ventilator rate, which is the usual after ARDS happens, was 96% mortality. And it was only by stopping the ventilators and using the nasal cannula, high oxygen, that they were able to avert many of those deaths, which the US still doesn't want to learn because they're interested in large population data and not what we've discovered at the end. And now the integrative doctor is saying, put some anutailam or some mustard oil or some neem oil, because neem is pitta ghana, and then give the nasal cannula. And what they're noticing is that the oil inside the nose is not killing the patients. Now, this is individual data, right? But it is using another framework. So what do you guys think of scientific evidence Nazis who are currently preventing other systems from coming in and getting involved? What do you think of at least opening up their pores so that we can get other people in? Dr. Rao first.
So let me give the example that we are doing now, because it's not a foo-foo science. People are believing in it. As I said, the patients that we have put on this comprehensive program, they're extremely happy. So what's happening is now, so we have put this approach. This is a personalized, comprehensive approach. Have we published? Yes, we have evidence-based publications, research-based publications. These have been peer-reviewed journals. Okay. Have you put an IRB? No. Why? The IRB is refusing to entertain us. Okay. Have you put an FDA? Yes, but the FDA is also refusing. That's fine, but we are not stopping in our tracks. The reason being that patients are coming to us and we are still seeing them. Our hope is that, and then I think we are very close to that. By the time we gather the data, we have now almost 1,000 patients, okay, and they're doing extremely well. So what's happening is, and this is very interesting, it's not us pushing now, it's the patients who are now pushing their doctors saying that why can't we put us on the same protocol that Rao and Bredesen is putting us on? Why can't you do the same thing? So now what's happening is, even though those guys foo-fooed us saying that this is not authentic science, they are now, instead of saying, okay, we will not put in the program, they're actually taking a step back and they're looking at what we are doing. And then they are realizing that's where functional medicine also has helped them. They are realizing that sure enough, the gut has to be treated first. And what we have done a very simple thing. We've just given them a Dipana and Pachana just to make sure that their gut is fine. And now whatever you do, they're doing it, they're extremely, they're amenable to all those treatments. And so what's happening is now people themselves are being empowered, and so they're going back to the doctors. So that's where I think we in the Alzheimer's field are very happy about the progress. It's not happening way fast as we thought, but it is a progress, and we are being empowered by the people themselves who are coming back to us and saying, we have told our doctors, and hopefully this will be replicated in other areas of diseases as well. So I think we're getting there. It's a slow process, but it will be there.
Dr. Rao, some of them even knowing that their doctors don't want them to use this stuff. I get a lot of those patients. What they do is they just do it at home, because in many countries you can get access to Dipana Pachana. You don't need much to get ginger or turmeric or some of these medicines, right? If Dr. Sastri wants to take green tea because he feels that that's going to be a good antioxidant for him, he doesn't need to go and take the US FDA approved green tea extract by prescription. He can just get it at home. And this is what patients are doing. The unfortunate part is that we're not harnessing those data. And so patients are moving things forward. The market is moving things forward, but we're not able to harness the scientific evidence, because scientists, frankly, I mean, I'm going to say the biomedical scientists especially, are working too slowly for society. Society's like, you guys are trying to prove this using mechanisms that are outdated. We're going forward. We're going to do Dipana Pachana. Thank you for the prompt. We're out of here. So,
but just to let you know, I don't know about other fields, but in our field, in fact, that's my job. We are collecting these huge data sets because all we want to do is make sure that at the end of the day, it's just not the patients who are talking, but even the doctors are looking at it and looking at the data. Because after all, again, we are going back to step one where we started off, the data. Where is the data? Okay, so we are putting all the data together. In fact, I'm analyzing bunch of Excel spreadsheets that spans like 4,000 patients and worth so much of data. So yes, it's happening. But as I said, it's not a fast track approach, but we are getting there.
But it's a beginning, isn't it? It's a beginning.
Yes, it is a beginning. Yeah.
And
people are talking. Doctors are talking. Clinicians are talking about it. Why do you think the entire branch of functional medicine came about? I mean, we had integrative medicine.
Exactly.
Where did this functional medicine come about? Because functional medicine realized that integrative medicine, we need to take one step further. And so the entire branch of functional medicine, and guess what? The first thing that they put up in functional medicine is the Charaka Samhita's definition of what a human is. So where did that come from? So it is, the recognition is there. People are realizing.
I know Jeffrey Bland, and I told him that what he's doing is the biochemical equivalent of Ayurveda. He had no idea what Ayurveda is, so he invited an Indian, thinking all Indians know Ayurveda. So we all know how true that is. And the fact that they're even open to Ayurveda is a really good thing, because they work very fast and they're all clinicians. And so I think that they're going to be able to embrace Ayurveda much more quickly. Before, Arti, I want to let you have a chance to speak now, but I want to just also bringing in another multidisciplinary scientist who is with us. You can see him. He's a epigenetics expert, a DNA expert, an agricultural expert, and he's done a lot of self-counting techniques. And he's actually a student of Sankhya. So he's been doing a lot of the thing that you talked about before, the fate-based approach, which I still want you to talk about, Ram. So we're inviting Dr. Madan in, and Dr. Arati, you wanted to say something.
No, I just kind of wanted to add to what has been said already, in the sense that I think there is in terms of like basic things like Deepanapach, I do it with my clients, and we don't need to go through some extraordinary herbs. Often it's lots of very simple things which we can get a hold of and actually do this with people and clean. And they're like, I think everybody is open. It is patient driven now, because patient information is widespread. We're in technology. Nobody wants innovative devices. They want more about it's a self-empowered engine which is running right now. And I think as in terms of our medical systems, national health services, we all need to start thinking about how these things can start marrying together. So we need correlation of different sciences at any given time. But also at the same time, I also see the other angle, which is where something as simple as turmeric, which has been branded the golden herb, people are abusing that. So mainstream science has now decided we take out the curcumin, start using it. You guys may have all been aware of that case in 2017 in California, where some naturopath decided to give it to a patient IV and the patient died. We have to be careful. So some level of standardization also has to come, and that commitment has to come from the Ayurveda, Ayush platforms, and say, okay, let's make this available for clinicians. Let's bring it to medical schools. Let's bring it into national health structures slowly, and by very divisive methods like you're doing, Dr. Rao, by gathering clinical data which can showcase that actually when we use this alongside whatever other things I'm doing, it has this basic effect, and it changes lives. It changes lives at the end of the day. And we all know that Ayurveda and systems like that, in terms of chronicity of diseases and prevention, it has a wonderful place.
When you said that we're waiting for different sciences to come together, the sciences don't come together. The sciences are already together. If you go back thousands of years and you go to someone who did Vedic schooling, like my teachers, they learned the 64 kalas and the 14 vidyas at the same time when they were children. And they learned them in step, from the age of 3, 4, 5. Each one of them had to master some type of music and the knowledge of sound, either by song or by an instrument. Each one of them had some kind of language skills beyond Sanskrit and their local language. Usually they were also learning English or Hindi. They each had something in the sport so that they would get coordination. Many of them had Kalari Payatu. Many of them had some sort of like archery or some sort of sport. They all had some kind of self-defense, like Kalari Payatu or archery or a martial art. They had so many of these different arts and sciences that was a part of their learning. And that got pulled into disciplines by the Oxbridge system that has different cuts of what you become a specialist in. They did not have that kind of breakdown. Yes, you had your guru who was a Hasti Ayurveda specialist. So you learned a lot about the elephant and how to take care of the elephant. But there were many people that were like a phase diagram. They had, so many different aspects and phases of what they were masters in, and they would do all of them. I'm wondering, Dr. Sastri, you are an expert of chemistry, of metallurgy, of food sciences, and you have this, interface. Do you see that things need to be artificially separated, or do you see a future where we as human beings bring the sciences back together and therefore allow?
We do not have an option but to put them all together. But please remember that when we are doing Ayurveda, for example, turmeric, the way it is treated before it is given to the patient, that standardization has to come.
Yes.
Unfortunately, that standardization is not there. Therefore, the belief is missing.
Yes, absolutely.
The only reason why allopathic thing works is because there is standardization. If they were also unstandardized like Ayurveda, Ayurveda would have flourished in this country. We need to bring in standardization, and that is the only way we can take it forward. Every single ingredient, when it is processed, at what temperature, what amount of water, what type of water, what is the pH of the water, what is the mineral content of the water, all these are important. This has to be documented properly, and the right method of processing these herbs, etc., has to be worked out. Then only a certain amount of standardization and therefore a concept of belief will come.
Well, we just talked about individualization. How are you going to standardize plants that are also individuals and grow differently in different soils and different climates and different humidities and different seasons, and are transported? Turmeric growing in India has a very, very different potency and medicinal efficacy.
Yeah.
Being the land and the water that I take while I'm in India is like that turmeric. When I grow it in Costa Rica or in Utah, it's a very different turmeric, even though it's technically still curcuma longa. How do I standardize that?
This is the problem, for example, for food in India. If I go from the west coast to the east coast, depending on where it is going, what soil is used, what water is used, the food ingredients themselves change. And when the ingredients change, the final product based on the ingredients and the methodology used changes. So this is where that standardization has to come.
But maybe it can't come. Maybe there's just too much individualization. Maybe we have to adjust things in slightly different ways to account for the individual differences.
Or does it come back to what you were saying originally, Dr. Bhaswati, about how in India they came up with this idea of nagars, and maybe that's how food evolved in India, so that when you go into the southern states, there is a certain type of spice combination that you eat versus when you go to the north or the east or the west. And there is an understanding that in a certain nagar or in a certain collection of geography and people and population and what you're affected by, you do certain things. That's sort of a practice in India which it has been going on for eons, and it's called tradition. But under the umbrella of that tradition, there is a science and a logic, and nobody questions it. Like, I know that people in India know that this is the season, so we don't eat this because that doesn't grow. It's just like a natural, evolving wheel that everybody fits into. So the point, and going back to something like turmeric, and let's extract the curcumin and let everybody have curcumin everywhere in the world, is it really going to work for everybody? And people are eating tablespoonfuls of turmeric every day neat. You can't do that. It doesn't work for everyone. On a therapeutic dosage, if turmeric is given, it's probably anything between 1 to 3 grams, and that depends on whether you're vata, pitta or kapha, and what the season is and what will happen. And here we are again, this wonderful spice which has been in our kitchens is suddenly turned into some wonder thing, and everybody's eating it. And I've had to tell people not to. My breast cancer patients who were taking a tablespoonful of turmeric every day because they said, oh, it prevents cancer. And I had to tell them, please stop. That's the wrong information. And
Say that. Difficult to say, Doctor.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Then finish, and then Dr.
Yeah.
Arti.
We always used to take turmeric in milk, but grandmothers used to give us. Today, turmeric latte is the most popular drink in the US.
Yes. I'm going to invite Dr. Kamal Krishna Banik to come on if he wants to ask a question. Arti, I think what you're saying about turmeric is true, but we have to be careful. If we tell them not to take it, then they say, oh my God, is it dangerous? What are the side effects? This morning, I got an email from someone asking me about the dangers of Ayurvedic medicine. And I said, Ayurvedic medicine is not dangerous. The people practicing it and mispracticing it create the danger. The medicine itself is safe. So if people don't understand turmeric, yes, I agree with you that it's a big problem. I also agree with you that there's a social bias. When we were little and we had milk with turmeric, people would say, what's that yucky stuff your mom is giving you? That's gross. Can't you guys afford chocolate milk? And now they're paying, $15 to get turmeric milk.
Turmeric latte. No, you're absolutely right. We have to inform people appropriately when we're talking about individualized science. And when somebody as an individual comes in and their pitta is really high and they're eating a tablespoon of turmeric, it's not appropriate. And that's when you tell them, take a latte instead, warm it up, so that it's all about alchemy. This is the beauty of things like Ayurveda. Nothing is ever bad. It's just the prescriber or the person directing them should know exactly what measure and what combination for you, so that it's a workable solution. And if nothing else, put turmeric in your food. We've been doing that in our spice boxes for eons. It's never going to hurt anybody. It'll be balancing with everything else. But if you're taking it as a therapeutic dosage, people should be appropriately given those instructions.
But how do you do that when the group of scientists and doctors say one thing? I was talking with an OB-GYN friend of mine at my hospital today, and he was telling me, I've upped my dose of turmeric. I said, why are you upping it? More is not better. In America, if you have more money, that's better. There have been studies out that show that there's a range, and above that, more is not better. Over $75,000 of income a year is not better. It actually decreases the quality of life. There have been studies that show that. But this doctor is absolutely convinced that more is better. So he's taking more turmeric because he's, practicing and he has to touch patients. He's taking green tea. He's wearing an amulet around his neck. I said, what's the scientific evidence for that amulet? No, more is good. It's really, really good. Dr. Sastri, you can probably tell us, please, about how turmeric is taken out of the ground and processed to get into those bottles that we actually buy.
That would take a long time, but for example, I live in a place like Manipal, where I actually see the turmeric plant. I see the turmeric flower, and I see the 2-3 varieties of turmeric flower and the 2-3 varieties of turmeric that really comes out. So already we are talking about 3 varieties of turmeric in one locality in the country. And obviously their properties are different.
And how is that taken by the producers and made into turmeric powder? Do you know that it's cured? It's cured.
Yes.
Basically,
they give it salt.
That's right. And all the turmeric oil is taken out, and then the dried turmeric rhizome, which looks like a root, is dried, not even in the shade anymore. It's dried in these dehumidifiers because time is money. And then it's sold. Go ahead.
I set up a cardamom oil processing plant. You take cardamom, take the full cardamom seeds, not the seeds, entire thing.
The pod.
Put it in normal hexane, extract the cardamom oil, sell the residue to the general public. And they think it is cardamom.
But it's cardamom infused with hexane.
Exactly.
Hexane will go away, don't worry. Hexane boils it, but
it just dries away.
The entire main ingredient is lost.
That's right. That's right. So I've asked Dr. Kamal Krishna Banik to unmute and to come on. I think he might be either unable or unwilling to come on. So I'm going to see if there are some other people. Elizabeth had a question, but she is no longer available. I can't see her on the participant screen. And I'm wondering if there's anyone else that would directly like to ask a question to our panelists. And here, Dr. Madan is here, so I'll hand over the charge of the participants to him, because he has been very dutifully watching the chat and answering questions and throwing in studies and references as we go. As I hand it over to Dr. Madan, I'd like to invite the three of you panelists to either verbally or written say that you would be willing to share your email address and phone number, because several people on the chat have asked for each of you to at least give your email address or your phone number. I think you have some consulting jobs waiting for you.
Yes.
The three of you do.